What we're going to do today is lay up a coupler, and I had a mandrel, but I think one of my buddies borrowed it, so I had to make a new mandrel. One thing I was going to do was use Aerotech liner and then put about 10 layers of some 5 mil Mylar on top of here to make a mandrel. But I ended up finding a piece of 4-inch thick wall tubing in my scrap pile. I have a lathe, and so I was able to turn up a mandrel. To figure out what size mandrel you need to start out with inside dimensions of your tube. The tube we laid up earlier is 3.885 inches inside, and the next thing you need to do is figure out how many layers your coupler is going to be. And I was always taught that your coupler had to be thicker or stronger than the body tube and stuff. And so we went with 6 layers on the body tube, and so I'm going with 9 layers on my coupler. I figured out how much each layer was giving me, slightly over 10 thousandths of an inch. I'm getting about 90 thousandths here, 90 thousandths here, plus the Mylar. And so doing some math and stuff, I figured out that the best size for my coupler, or my mandrel, was going to be 3.698 inches, and then that accounted for the Mylar that I currently have on here, my 9 layers and all that stuff, and that it should be a fairly close fit to come in here. While I have this in my hand, somebody on one of the forums was asking how nose cones fit in here. This is a regular plastic 3.9 inch nose cone. The wall thickness on this is 0.64, and it's a fairly loose fit going in that you would have to put some tape on here. But the other cool part about this is that it's a very good fit. There's hardly any seam right there. So the only thing you'd have to do to use a plastic nose cone on this is probably put a layer or 2 of tape on this if you're using that as your recovery, so that you can pick up the rocket by the nose cone and stuff. So we'll set this aside. And so in this segment, I'm going to lay up a coupler using this mandrel, and then when we get all done with this in a couple of days, I'll show you how to make a coupler out of a piece of body tube. So I already have my epoxy mixed up. I weighed my glass, figured out how much epoxy I wanted, got it to the right consistency, and always mix in a fairly big shallow bowl. That way the epoxy warming itself up doesn't make it set off way quicker than I need it to. So we have the 2 mil Mylar on here already. We have our 1.5 inch overlap right here. I have no tape in the middle of my Mylar. I only have it taped on the edges. I put tape all around the edges once I get it in place, just to keep epoxy from getting everything. So we're going to go ahead and put some epoxy on this mandrel. Same process as before. We got a 2-inch brush here. I'm making the coupler, I think, about 10 inches wide. I'll be able to cut it down to whatever I need. It's better to have too much than not enough. When I let go of this mandrel, you'll notice that it's not dead center on my spindle, because this end is just a big opening with some spacers in there. So I have my glass here. I'm going to pull it out, get over here to my starting line. Have my paper towels all handy. I can push it, pull it to wherever I want to start it. First coat's pretty wet. Got a bug in my epoxy. Okay, this is going to be 9 layers. You want it stronger than the body tube. So I'm not counting because I have 10 feet of glass cut on this roll down here. And each layer is taken slightly less than 12 inches. So when I get to about 10 inches left, that's where I'm going to cut it back on this line right here. I'm not great at counting things like this. There's actually 2 pieces of glass on there. They're 60-inch pieces. I cut them 10 inches wide, so there's 2 5-footers. I have my peel ply all cut. Getting off course right there, pulling it back over. The harder you pull on this paintbrush, the more epoxy you're going to get out of the underneath layers. The only time I think you could actually have a starved for epoxy layup is if it didn't get wetted out in the first place, doing it this way. I'm not sure on vacuum bagging or vacuum whatevering. All we're doing is applying the epoxy, pulling it around, making it tight, pulling out the excess epoxy just by how much we're pulling on it. If I pull down on this, I'm not sure if you can see it, but you can see the epoxy pulling up through there. And that's all I'm trying to do, but I'm doing it with a paintbrush. So this gives me about 5.5, 5 and a little bit layers. I have another piece on that roll. scissors. Have everything ready. So that was the foot or so extra that I was talking about. I figured out it mathematically. Somebody will probably call me or email me and say, hey, you only put 8 on there. I'll know about the time that I take it off of here and try it inside that body tube. Okay, so we have everything there. We have the peel ply. I'm going to put a little bit of alcohol in there so I can thin down that epoxy. Working that extra epoxy out through the peel ply. Okay, and that's it for this one. We'll open it up, we'll see if it fits, and then the next one I'll take a piece of the body tube and I'll cut a strip out of it. We'll glass that up, we'll add a couple, 3 more layers to that, and a couple different ways to lay up body tube. So what we're going to do today is see how well we did with making our coupler off a mandrel. Going to take the peel ply off. You can see how much epoxy came through, popping off. I'm going to leave it on the mandrel for a minute and we'll talk about why. And before I try this on here, there's a lot of variables, measuring, compression, and the chances of this fitting exactly right, it's pretty slim. If it's too big, I'm going to sand it. And I sand it, I have a lathe, and so that's why I'm leaving it on the mandrel right now, that if I need to sand this, I can easily chuck this up and sand it right here. If it's too small, then I'm going to need to put it back on the mandrel so that I can add the appropriate number of layers of fiberglass veil, which is very thin stuff. So we'll go ahead and see how well this fits. And I think maybe I got lucky. Maybe just a little bit of sanding, a little bit. So, measuring a whole bunch of times, I figured out on the compression how thick each one of my layers of this size fiberglass with my technique was. I figured out what the inside diameter was that I needed to work to. I figured out how many layers I needed for my coupler to make it strong enough. I always make the coupler stronger than the airframe itself. Okay, just put it on the lathe. Made like 3 passes with some 220. Tried it again. Fit much better. Still a little bit tight. So then I put it back in the lathe, took a couple passes on it again, and it's to the point where I'm good. So now I need to take it off the mandrel. So we got all the tape off, most of it. The tape that's still on there is actually on top of the Mylar, I hope. Here's the coupler. You're going to remove the inside Mylar. It comes out in one piece. You can see it's only overlapped like 1 inch to 1.5 inches. I don't know if you can see that. Make sure that you get it all out. One piece. We'll try it on the tube. So that's a pretty good fit. Try it the other way. Might be a little tighter. Yep. So I have options. that's how you lay up a coupler off a mandrel. What I'll show you next is taking a piece of the body tube, we'll cut a strip out of it, and we'll make a coupler out of that.